we are. So we have the second part of the morning. I ask to Sonia Luisi to introduce this second part. I repeat, Sonia Luisi, she's making the PhD at Polytechnic of Milan, but in the same time, she's fellowship in Pavia, and so this is something that connect our two schools. So thank you, Sonia, for the introduction, and after I leave Alessandro Rocca to make his speech.
Okay, again, good morning, everyone. In this second part of the morning, our guest will be Alessandro Rocca and PhD student Giulia Bonifati, Chiara Lionello, and Beatrice Balducci. Thank you for being here, first of all. I will make a little introduction of Alessandro Rocca, that is a full professor of architectural and urban design and coordinator of the PhD program of architectural urban interior design at the Polytechnic of Milano. He was visiting professor and lectured at many international universities, such as Polytechnic of St. Petersburg, Ciudalfa, and many others. And he is author and curator of several books on the field of architecture and landscape, such as Lo Spazio Smontabile, Architetture Low Cost Low Tech, Natural Architecture, and 9 Planetary Gardens. Probably also thanks to his long experience as an editor of important architectural journals, such as Lotus International, he offers through his book and lecture an overview that really help understanding and clarifying contemporary issues related to the field of architecture. After his lecture about mobile architecture, there will be the contribution, will be presents the contribution of PhD students, Giulia Bonifati, Chiara Lionello, and Beatrice, that we thank you for their participation also. Their researches are focused on 3 topics that are strictly related to the design thematic of our workshop: temporary architecture, urban regeneration, and emergency architecture. Now I give the floor to them. Again, thank you to be here with us.
Thank you very much, Sonia, for this introduction, for the organization of the workshop. And thank you, Carlo Berizzi, for this invitation. I'm very glad to be here. Also, I'd like to say something about our doctoral program, where Sonia is involved. She is following that. Our program now has 39 candidates, PhD candidates. We have 9 new candidates that are just being selected now in these weeks. 4 of them just took their doctoral diploma in 10 days ago. We have 21 candidates that have an agreement with external institutions, universities, but also factories, also companies. We have 17 of them that are foreigners, so is a program very international, very open to the cooperation with other institutions, University of Pavia also, thanks to Carlo Berizzi. So it's an interesting situation, also with a large board of professors that take different points of view, different disciplines. Architectural design is the center, of course, but there are also professors of history, of technology, of urban design, of representation. So is quite a large team of candidates, of young researchers, of more old professors, more experienced professors, and we have this international network with 8 European universities, the CARE system, that give us the possibility of making twice per year an international milestone with our PhD candidates. That is a very good opportunity to be informed, to exchange information with our European colleagues, and to have a constant updating about the more relevant themes in research in architecture, in doctoral research in architecture today. today, after my short talk, we will have one doctor is Giuliana Bonifati. She finished in 2018 her course. But it was about her research about creative urban factories. And then we have two candidates, Chiara Lionello, that started last year her research about the interior attitude of contemporary space, and Beatrice Balducci, she started the end of 19, practically this year, a research about keep safe, about the security, the works of securization of the mostly the public space. So I'm very glad that we can have a small window in this workshop for our doctoral program, and I hope that some of the students that are listening, that are participating in this workshop, can be interested in going ahead with their studies, also considering the opportunity of following a PhD program at Politecnico di Milano in architectural design. Now I can share my screen just to say something about one of the aspects of okay. Is it fine the screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay. Okay. So I tried to collect some notes, some memories about the question of movement in architecture. As we know, architecture is per se stable. Stability is one of the main character of every building, of every project. You know, the research for stability, for firmitas, is absolutely fundamental in architecture. But also, at the same time, there are often experiments that consider the possibility of movement as a positive factor, because normally movement is a very negative factor. No? Movement is produced by earthquakes, by the ruins, by destruction, by bombing, but all negative phenomena. But also there is something of beautiful in the movement, something of unexpected, and something that questions the space, that change our perception of space. Movement is always interesting because it's something that changes our perception of space and reveals something, unveils something new. This, for example, was a great intuition of the artist Alexander Calder, that starting the beginning of last century, experiencing movable sculptures, creating a very light structure that were always in movement. Just with a very light breath, this structure moved, changing the form, changing the relation with the space, changing the balance of the entire structure. So Calder is, for example, a very beautiful example of this research about movement. Movement as a part of a structural conception in this case, and also a formal concept. A kind of conceptual use of the movement is typically a door. A door is a movable part of a building, a movable part of an apartment, of a room, is the part that move, like the windows. That should be another very interesting chapter, but next time. Marcel Duchamp understood perfectly this potentiality of the door as something that changed the architecture, changed the meaning of the architecture, creating in his small apartment one door that, when closed the bedroom, opened the atelier, and when closed the atelier, opened the bedroom. Referring to this French proverb, a door must be open or shut, cannot be open and shut at the same time. This door is always open and shut at the same time. Another kind of movement is the collage, the collecting things, disparate elements, move these elements in another place and make an assemblage, a three-dimensional collage of these elements, creating a new space. This was the work of Kurt Schwitters, a German artist in the 20s, the 30s, based on the construction of this very unstable, very informal structure, the Merzbau, made of that, of the collection of disparate things. So things that were made in other places for other goals and find a new form, a new role in this Merzbau. And this is the back of the Merzbau. The Merzbau from outside, where is very clear that all the elements are elements made to be moved. These are like the box to transport things from one place to another place. So this is like a nice movement, no? A blocked movement in quite a hazardous, an unstable configuration. This is another work by Marcel Duchamp, very interesting, because is where the movement of things, the composition of things, is not to create a clear space, but is just to create an image. Étant donné, given the water and the gas for the lighting, is an installation that visitors can just see from one hole in a door in the Art Museum of Philadelphia. And like in the diorama of the 19th century, and through the door, they see a set that is like a theater. The theater is another very important sample of architecture where movement is fundamental, an architecture that is made for the movement. And in this installation, the movement of the water and the movement of the light are very important and create the allure of this strange composition, strange image. And you see how the artifact is industrial, is very rough, because the view is just the important thing. And this on the right is the view, is what the visitors can see. Another movement, more conceptual too, is the Canaletto movement. When Canaletto took the different projects by Andrea Palladio, the Basilica built in Vicenza, the Rialto Bridge never built, the Chiericati Palazzo on the left built in Vicenza, and assembled these three disparate architecture in the Canal Grande of Venice. This is an analogous city created through the movement of the buildings. Buildings are not stable, but are images, structures, projects that can travel and create analogous urban scenarios. The theater. This is the Globe Theater built by the company of William Shakespeare on the left. On the right is the beautiful Teatro Olimpico built by Andrea Palladio in Vicenza. They are more or less built in the same years, following completely different ideas of theater, but both are based on the movement of the actors, of course, movement also of the people entering and leaving the theater, and the creation of this fictional scenario that is so important for the drama. So this is the plan on the left side of the Teatro Olimpico by Andrea Palladio, with this fictional world behind the stage. And on the right is the Total Theater by Walter Gropius, that was based on the idea of the rotation of the main elements of the theater to create three different possible configurations. This is the theater conceived for Erwin Piscator, who was an avant-garde art director, theater art director, very interesting and very futuristic in the approach. This is a famous, quite famous apartment that Le Corbusier rebuilt at the top floor of a 19th century building on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. And this is the Bestegui apartment, is entirely based on the movement. You see here the modernist volumes of the two floors on the top of the Arc de Triomphe on the left and the traditional 19th century important bourgeois building below the Le Corbusier intervention. This is the garden of the apartment. This is the famous drawing with which Le Corbusier selected the images of Paris, cutting the panorama, cutting the general view, and just selecting the Tour Eiffel and l'Arc de Triomphe as the lonely image of the city. These are the plans of the two levels. You see the stairs in the middle of the living room, and also that very specific form of the garden that you will see is the real theater of the movable architecture. This is the living room with the stairs. The stairs go up and arrive in this garden, where, for example, the fence of granary can sleep, can move over some rails, opening different views of the city. In this case, for example, clearing the view of Notre Dame. Also on the right, there are these walls that electrically can be moved. And there is this technology very important, because the stairs that start from the living room arrive in this small room into the terrace. You cannot get directly into the terrace, but you have there a periscope, and through the periscope you can see Paris. So through a movable instrument that rotating can give you the entire view of the city. So time is another very important element of movement. So the Chirico, Aldo Rossi, the clock, the fixed time of the clock that is not going ahead is an important architectural element that fix an hour, not fix a specific time, and anyway keep the building, keep the place out of the continuity of the history of the time to create something special, something different. And Aldo Rossi with the clocks, but also with the ruins, with the different drawings, elaborate this idea of buildings that move, that change form, that lose their stability and create new configurations, like the Galaratesa building, like other buildings, other memories that move and enter into another dimension. And this is the real movable and removable building that Aldo Rossi did, is the Teatro del Mondo a Venezia. I think that everyone knows this was a very famous installation for the Biennale of Architecture in 1980, designed in 1979, and was a very iconic theater, floating theater that was taken into the Laguna, into the Canal Grande, and was also rebuilt some years after in Genova for a large exhibition curated by Germano Cenant. And this is the more movable architecture that we can imagine. The caffettiera, the cafe machine, the boiler designed by Aldo Rossi, taken the forms, inspiration from his architecture. And this is another kind of mobility over a building designed by Aldo Rossi. This is a building that Aldo Rossi and Gianni Braghieri designed and started to build in San Cristoforo in Milan, 1983. the building was never finished. Is a famous sample of Eco Monster, of huge abandoned fabric that cannot be reused anyway. And for the Biennale of Venice of 28, Studio Albori imagined to occupy this loosened structure with very light, maybe temporary, removable small houses that can colonize this useless and huge structure. This is another sample of mobile architecture, is the Alejandro Ravena complex, the Quinta Monroy in Chile, where he designed just a part of the buildings, considering that the inhabitants will complete these buildings, these houses, along their own desires and needs. Open architecture. So architecture as an infrastructure of the main things, kitchen, bathrooms, structure, and then to be completed by the people. This is another kind of mobility that is very fascinating for me, is the thin table by is the thin table by Jun Ishigami. This is a table based on a very important state of instability. Is this circle of sheet steel that is open like a pre-compressed structure at the end, and just the things put over the table keep the table in a very, very difficult state of stability. So all the things that you see over the table that is 9 meters long and extremely thin keep this table stable. Otherwise, if you keep away the things, the table recover the previous form of a circular system. So the disposition of the objects is the structural intervention that make create this very unstable balance. And here is the people that cannot believe that this so thin table can stay in balance. Just to finish, I want to remember this great architect, John Edgeduke. He did interesting architectural projects like this famous house that is based exactly on movement, on enlarging and stressing the connection between the studio and the living part of the house, with beautiful drawings, adopting the technique of the collage, of the assemblage of different elements with different colors, different shape. But the project that I want to quote, to remember, to finish this short talk is Victims. Victims is the competition entry which Edgeduke designed in 1984 for a famous important competition for the Prince Albert Palais in Berlin. And Edgeduke imagined this precinct with a series of objects, very light, like something between a memorial, something between a memorial and the garden, and a strange fair of attractions, very symbolic, also very enigmatic. Using architecture to create something that in some way it can be considered as an architectural translation of the Grand Verre by Marcel Duchamp, of because it's the same idea of connecting figures, personage. This is the list of the 67 personage and spaces, and to imagine a different form, a different architecture for each of them, and to assemble them into a closed space, into something that for Duchamp was the glass, and for Edgeduke was this precinct. And this is, for example, one of the installations that Eiduk did. He didn't win the competition in Berlin, but he realized some of the personage after or in the same time. This, for example, is one of the personage. The Colors of Time is a movable and temporary installation with the wheels on wheels that he realized in London. And this, I show you now the series of installations that Eiduk imagined for victims. For me, are very interesting because are absolutely useless. No? This is, in a way, poor architecture. There is no use, are no houses, nor workspace, just exercise of architectural invention, extremely exciting for me, extremely fertile to get architectural ideas. So here we have the Peacock's Walk, the Room for Thought, the Children's Spinner, like a merry-go-round, the picnic table, the office tower, the Shade Woman, the Crochet Lady, the Identity Card Man. So you see our very light structure, always, quite always there is a movement. Here, for example, there is this stairs in the identity card unit that can be moved for sure. Often there are wheels, rotating things, movable things. This is the Keeper of the Records, record hall. This is the Toll Taker. This is another huge wheel, the Timekeeper, the Wheel Clock, the Traveler's Bus. This is the end, the real automotive, and the Disappeared Irreconcilable Numbers. And this is the application of the passport buildings. So it's late. I think I can stop here. Thank you for your attention. If you have any question, of course, please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alessandro. Very quick presentation, but very clear the aspect that you wanted to touch. And I think it's some references that everybody has, other one that maybe can be new references. So I think it's interesting. I don't know if there are any kind of question, or if we can pass to the research of the three students, and one is the doctoral degree, and two students are made. Do you have any kind of question? Okay, Alessandro, I think we can go on. And so I don't know who is the first presentation. Who is the first? Sonia, can you help me? Or Alessandro, I don't know.
I don't know. I think Sonia has the schedule.
Yes.
Okay, we will start with Giulia Bonifati.
Okay.
Hi. Okay.
Hi.
So Giulia, share your screen and you can start, and thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, thank you, Professor Rocca, Professor Berizzi, and Sonia for the invitation to this summer school. I'm Giuliana Bonifati, and I'm an architect. And I attended my PhD program between 2014 and 2018 at Polytechnic of Milan. And I produced a research about architecture and creative transformation. And I used the case studies of London as the main research field to experiment my theory. The research was supervised by Professor Carlos Garcia Vasquez, and I'm going to explain a bit. This is like a very, okay, a very little summary of my research, I'd like to explain my research path that started in 2014 with the admission in the PhD program, and then has seen a period of 2 years working in Milan, and about understanding the first question and understanding what is creativity and what means creativity applied to architecture. Then I applied for a PhD exchange period at UCL at the Bartlett School of Architecture that I attended between 2016 and 2017 under the supervision of Peter Bishop and Pablo Sendra. And during that year, I got the opportunity to start analyzing the case studies, and I decided to make London the main objective of my research. And at the end of that period, I decided to stay in London, and I started working in a bespoke consultancy about urban practices. So I got completely inside the process, and I started understanding that how the role of architects change. So the research changed a bit the line, and I started to try to use case studies as a tool of understanding how the process can continue, how the process can be spread in the city, and how the architects need to change a bit their role. And so I think that the professional experience is part of my research, and that's why I think that this presentation is a little summary of the PhD research with an improvement of awareness making by the professional experience, where I try to keep always the research topic also inside the design practice. So this presentation is divided in 2 parts: a theoretical background that is more related about what happened in creative cities, and an operational tool, so how we can use theory to structure our projects, and what are the role of the architect. I'm a designer, I'm working in an urban design practice and in a landscape practice. I used to work in other urban design practice, so I consider myself a designer, and I think that research need to get inside the design process as well. So everything began with a big change, a change in how we look at our cities, a change in the way cities are transforming, and a change in the way urban design is practices. And I like to show always this 2 picture, which is a place in London, in East London, Hackney Wick, and is a project by Ensemble, which is a practice in London that just activated and under-elevated in Hackney Wick during the Olympics. So it's an example of a temporary project that activates a place which is already under transformation because of the Olympic Park big project transformation and development of the whole neighborhood. So how we change looking at our city? I think that we look at our city nowadays as a big dynamic system that is composed by a lot of assets, and that create an assemblage. And of course, we have all the assets related to architecture, such as urban assets, built-up spaces, open spaces, infrastructure. But inside our city, there's a lot of other materials. I like to call them materials because I think that we are architects and we're working with materials. And in a cities, our materials are not only the tangible and physical materials, but are also other things that get inside our project. So we have people, first of all, and communities. We have roles, so there are authorities, developers, practitioners, institutions. We have all the economic part that drive all the process inside the cities. We have the environment, and then we have all the sphere of relationships. So we have social interactions, sense of place related to communities, and we have all the networks that are physical connections, but also completely virtual networks. And then we have the happenings, what happened. So we have programs, events, transformation, uses of places. All those materials get inside our project, and we need to consider that, because how we decide to make in relation all those materials, all the project can change. So what happened to places? We can face, there was a moment that we start facing that we can make a project without doing anything. Like, for example, the Tango Nights in Buenos Aires, or for example, the the image on the right-hand side, which is Granary Square in London, and it's just a fountain. If you go there in full winter, it's a completely empty space with people that crossing the fountains, which is not made water. But in summer, the place changed completely, because people get inside the water, and this big square become in like a pool, a real pool inside the city, in the center of London, because it's just close to King's Cross. And so doing things in a given space is already a project of transformation of the cities. And so I think that the urban design practice started changing with this awareness of this transformation inside the cities, and is not only a one-way direction approach, which is only the approach from the architectural side of designing a place and construct a site, but it is becoming like a multidisciplinary approach with a lot of actors involved inside, which are architects, of course, which are practitioners, but there are also employers, investors, developers, institutions, and with a lot of different knowledge and with a lot of different roles as well. So with the goal of building up like integrated and interconnected process. This was crucial for my experience, because I got the lucky to work with this bespoke consultant, which is central in a enormous real estate development in London, which is Elephant and Castle. And it was a 4 billion real estate investment, but it was thought from the beginning like a big partnership with big clusters of people working together, reaching different goals. On one side, we have the developers and the private sector and the stakeholders that had the goal of building up the space. But on the other side, there are different clusters working in research, in promotion, and also with community in order to activate the local community and the local economy, and from day one of the development. And they were transforming a place in London that was already there, that need to stay there, and they need to save the community that were already there. And our role as designers was not design the place, but was leading and chair the whole partnership. Because we were working directly with the promoter, that was Sadek Council, which is the local authorities the main local authorities inside of the neighborhood of Elephant and Castle. And we were not designing the place, but we were moving the lines in order to put together all the pieces of the project, of the process actually, because we started before that project started, and they keep going. I'm back in Italy, I'm not working there anymore, but they keep going also with the management of the site. So that was crucial because it opened to me a question: what's the role of the architects? And after a lot of consideration, maybe some years of thinking, I'd like to compare the architects to the role of the film director, which is composing elements, the actors, through a series of actions, the acts, and for us can be the project action inside in a given space, which is for us the urban background, and for them the scenes, and give life to a transformation process, which is the show for the film director, and which is project and the process of transformation for us. What is missed in our process? The reactions. In my thesis, I break down the whole process, understanding what we're missing, and I understood that what we are missing when we deliver a project, we don't know if that project works or not, because we have like a schedule and a timetable that we have to accomplish, but we don't know if it works. So we need reaction, and for us the reactions are social, economical, and spatial reactions, so how the place can accept the change. So in this way, I try to define three kinds of scenarios that sees architects as a film director, but with different roles. So in creative cities, I understood that we have some process that started alone and finished alone, that happened without any control. So in that case, our role, I think, is make understanding what happened and make the condition of keep this transformation going. So as happened in Granary Square, as happened in Buenos Aires, the transformation process happened without any kind of program, happened without doing anything actually, but just people doing something in a given space. And this is a project, I guess. And I think that as designers, as architects, we have to understand the value of this and the nature of this process and keep it going. And so enable the place to accept that change and to maintain the transformation. So continuing giving and driving the condition that this kind of activities can happen. And this is one example, which is very interesting because it's called Parking Day. Started one day in San Francisco when a group of people decided to just occupy illegally a parking plot inside of the house and just put some chairs and doing like sitting out in occupying a public space without any kind of regulation. What happened, it got success. And so they start doing it like once a month in San Francisco. And then someone understood the value of that things, and the Parking Day that started in only one shot became like a movement that was spread in the whole United States, and now also all over the world. If you're Googling parking day, you can find all the spots where this happened. So this is something that I guess is happened completely spontaneously, but then it became like a program. This is the second scenarios that I looked into, and it was like, I called creativity as an answer. So we're facing always every day in our cities, in Milan also, to big transformation, top-down intervention, and we are always engaged in big development projects that are completely designed and drawn from our desk and applied to a sort of place which is already there and that has spontaneous action inside and has probably bottom-up intervention. So, and sometimes I can say also always top-down intervention and bottom-up intervention and spontaneous action never speak together. So I guess that our role as architects, as designers, is understanding how they can speak together. So building up a relationship between top-down and bottom-up, because generally in most of the cases, top-down cannot work alone and bottom-up cannot work alone. So we need this kind of connection between them. And how to do that? Like strengthen the relationship between them, the human relationship between actors, so between people that work on the top-down activities and people that work in bottom-up activities, but also try to move the transformation together. So strengthen the meanwhile uses during the phasing of process. And that was exactly what happened in Elephant and Castle. So at the same time of development process, there was built and programmed a series of meanwhile uses that were using the empty space of the development. So generally, development site is building up by phasing, and it dures a lot of years. So during the phase one, the plot that was made for phase two can be activated in advance with temporary using in order to activate the place and activate the construction site from day one in order to get the local communities and get the local economies inside the process from day one, and make it the place livable from the beginning. This was an example that was Artworks Elephant. It was like a small, very small container cities that occupied like a plot between inside the elephant park, which was promoted by Sadec Council, and it was inside the development of land lease project, and it stayed there like for 4 years during the phase one and phase two of the project of the park. And now that this place, that the construction site get on, and this place need to be inside the construction site because of the development phasing, all this artwork elephant was removed and just moved on another place. So in projects like that face years and years of development, this kind of temporary use activities can completely activate the place and can also give us, so give the designer and the promoters and the developers the reaction, so understanding in advance if the place can work, because you don't know if until you open the site, when it's finished, you don't even know if the place can work, if people would like to go there or not. And these kind of activities which need to be planned, in my opinion, can give you in advance like feedback on your project, which is a very interesting thing, because you can completely change your thought and move on and make some changes in the project if you can see that it doesn't work. Again, this is polyflower flyover. The idea was exactly the same. So activated an abandoned and underused space just close to the Olympic Park, just for a little while, and change completely the perception of the place. And the last one is building up the real process, the design process, which is not the design project, from the first thinking to the management. And this is the example of making space in Dalston by Math Architect. And they made like a big master plan in Dalston, which is in East London, Hackney Council. And they were asked to renovate and make projects for only some little spot that you can see in a master plan. But at the same time, they built up a series of activation projects between phases of this element, such as, for example, occupying a street for dinner, or moving the activities that were planned to a given space into another one, maybe closed, just to understand that that place is changing. And this one, I think I like, is the best one, I think, is Gillett Square in Dalston, and is the renovation of a square. And they made the landscape project of the renovation of this square, but they put like a container. You can see it, that small pavilion between the two trees on the bottom part of the square. And that container contains all the playgrounds and the games, and they open up once a week that container, and the square changed completely face. And everyone can do that because the container is there, and you can just go there, open it, and grab a game and put it on the square, and just change everything. So that's my intervention, and that's my research. That is, I try to keep going with research, also in my practice, and I think is the value of my experience.
Okay, thank you very much, Julia. Maybe if there are some questions I collect to the end, just to stay on time. You know, stay in time is like stay in the budget for architects, so we have to all the time fight for this. But thank you very much for showing your research, your activities, looking to other possibilities, no, more informal to leave the spaces. So Sonia, can you tell me who is the next one? Can you say, please?
Yes. The next one is Chiara Lionello, that also speak about the temporary architecture inside the city context.
Thank you. You can start, Chiara. Thank you to join us.
Thank you very much. I share my screen.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you see it? Okay?
Yes, we see it. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Chiara Lionello. As Professor Rocca said in the beginning, I am in the second year of my PhD, so I'm still developing my research, and today I will show you what I have done, how I am moving, and my interest in research. The title of my research project is Userscapes, the interior attitude of contemporary space. I'm developing it with my supervisor, Professor Pierluigi Salvadeo from Politecnico di Milano. So let's start. The intention of my research arises from the direct observation of the contemporary urban context, where rapid changes, expanded mobility, and digital networks, and the everyday actions of a multicultural society are deeply changing the possibility to interpret the city only with the disciplinary tools of architecture, like typology, function, shape, and so on. That's why my thesis project wonders, is it possible to update the interpretative and design tools of the architect in order to deal with the complexity of the contemporary context? In order to face this question, my thesis will focus on those elements that today make the contemporary city a dynamic landscape, especially the ones related to the spontaneous everyday practices of its inhabitants. So my objectives can be summarized. They are more or less three. The first is updating the toolbox of the architect, defining a set of categories that support the traditional disciplinary ones, including more dynamic parameters that are related to the creative ability of people. The second is framing the concept of interior attitude of contemporary space. So explaining how today every space is constantly remixed and reinvented by its users, that inhabit it in a personal way, so expanding the attitude of the interior to the whole city and producing a blur of the traditional dichotomies of space, like interior-exterior, private-public, individual-collective, and so on. So my third objective is trying to understand how the project can deal with this phenomena. At the moment, I'm following a methodology that is based on three actions. The first is an interdisciplinary bibliographic research aimed to investigate the impact of phenomena like globalization, multiculturalism, and digital revolution on the theory of the city, and aimed to explain how the special practices of users can be interpreted as part of the design process. The second action that I'm doing is a design-driven research. I'm collecting a mix of design observations, doing some direct exploration of spontaneous spatial practices in several contexts. You will recognize this observation during my explanation of today because I will change the color of the page in pink. And third, the case studies collection, a mix of contemporary projects that will focus on the relationship between spatial project and creative users with no limits of scale, selected on a global base and in a period of time that goes from 2000 to 2020. Now I will try to go more inside the research, showing to you what I'm doing. I present you the 5 categories that I have selected until now. They are curatorship, inclusion, geography of uses, real, virtual, and transcalability. I will explain you better what they mean, but I want to say that each of them describe a specific aspect of this relationship between creative behaviors of people and the contemporary city, suggesting many possibilities for the architect to work with these creative actions. I will alternate some explanation about my direct observations and some case studies. The first category is called curatorship, and it is based on the observation that today, in a context that is horizontal, dynamic, and hyper-connected, everybody is used to do very different things in the same space, so modifying its meaning according to his own behavior. Starting from this consideration, we can say that every user today is the curator of his own space, as Paola Antonelli suggested in a lecture at MoMA, where she defines the practice of curating as a wider way of being in the 21st century. This is evident also in the spaces of our daily lives, smart working, sport activities that we make at home, but also domestic stuff that we manage from the public space using our smartphone. it is interesting to notice that all these actions usually don't depend on the quality of the architecture that surround them, but more on elements like digital devices, pieces of furniture, lighting, sounds, microclimate, way of dressing objects, and so on. Following this thought, it is possible to affirm that many spaces that we inhabit today are not just architectonical space, but rather complex userscapes, where everybody creates his own setup in order to host very different actions and meanings. So I will show you some observation that I did in the last period. This situation that I try to explain has been experienced by many of us during the lockdown due to coronavirus. So in this period, everybody basically tried to adapt his own domestic space to a new condition, moving inside the house all the activities that we were used to do outside it. This has been done thanks to a series of micro-curatorial practices, engaging technology, lighting, pieces of furniture, objects, but without really touching the architectonical space. All these curatorial practices made by the users transform every domestic space in a more complex structure, where opposite dimensions like public and private, individual and collective, domestic and working, interior and exterior, coexist in a continuous hybrid userscapes, whose dimensions goes far beyond the domestic walls through video call, social network, and other media. This curatorial attitude towards space is not just a temporary condition, but a new cultural way of being that we have acquired and experimented over time, and that could be seen as an interesting element to consider in the project, thinking about which are the conditions and elements that enable the creative behaviors of people. So developing a strategy that is dynamic and open. The second category is inclusion, and it is related to the observation that if we expand and multiply the curatorial behaviors of people, we may notice that many inclusive phenomena occur. As Robert Venturi said in the 70s, inclusion is a fundamental feature of the contemporary city. Inclusion of languages, of practices, of way of meaning and living space. But what does inclusion mean today? It is a question that emerges in the theme of the next Biennale of Architecture in Venice, whose title is How We Will Live Together, and that focus on the theme of coexistence. The curator, Ashin Sarkis, affirms that today the architect has to be the coordinator of a new spatial contract that has to include many actors and issues. That's why he encouraged the architects that will participate to work in interdisciplinary teams, involving builders, artisans, politicians, sociologists, and common citizens, focusing on the results coming from this inclusion of ideas and approaches. This way of working emerges also in the practice of many young architects who embody a vision of architecture that is sensitive to the most urgent issues of today, like integration, social innovation, or ecological crisis, and that work in a very different way from the institutional one. First, they work in multidisciplinary teams. After they choose a collective authorship, they don't work through drawings, renderings, or a cool collage, but through direct actions on the territory that they do engaging the different communities, usually reaching them through the use of social media. This is what happens, for example, in one of my case study, that is Place au Changement by Collective ETC in Saint-Étienne, in an empty plot where the administration had already planned to place a new building. The collective imagined an ephemeral open space that could be designed and built by the local community. With this goal, they activated a series of laboratories and activities open to the public, where people could basically self-build community equipment with the supervision of the collective. This project shows how it is possible to design places through a strategy that is open, inclusive, even fragmentary, and that the final aim of architecture could be not giving a close and permanent answer to urban problems, but creating relationships and communities in order to make them able to take care of space over time. The third category is called geography of uses, and it is based on the observation that the mix of inclusive phenomena in the city describes a new urban geography related to the ability of users to create new layers of meaning for the city, and that influence mobility and economy. This category provides a completely different description of the urban space that is not only based on the material aspect of space, but also on the immaterial ones. This is evident, for example, in the square of Jema El-Fnai Marrakesh, where the relationships between sellers, musicians, and performers create always a new creative spatial mixes, influencing the movement of tourists and the activities of related spaces, becoming an extensible model that give a dynamic dimension and shape to the space of the whole city. This dynamic place without a shape has been named by UNESCO as an immaterial heritage of humanity, and today it represents one of the most representative spots of the country, influencing the route of tourists and stakeholders. This was happened also in one of my case studies, Skandberg Square in Tirana, designed by the Belgium Stadio 51 and 4E in 2018. This gigantic open space was very difficult to be designed and to manage. This is why the mayor of Tirana decided to open a competition for architects in order to understand how to design it. The Belgian studio who won the competition was the only one who presented a project that was not based on buildings, but on a strategy of use of the public space that could engage the dynamic activities of people in order to balance and organize the open space. This strategy is based on the fact that the square pavement is structured with a grid of water sprouts hidden under the pavement, able to fill the space of water mirrors in different ways during the day and the night. The perimeter of the square was also equipped with a mix of elements like chairs, tables, greeneries, and shadows, making people free to use the public space according to their needs, and influencing the movement and activities of several groups, from the morning when the water leave the space in front of the mosque free and Muslim people meet to pray in front of it, to the evening when a lot of people meet to chat or to watch some outdoor show. The fourth category is called real virtual, and it is based on the fact that today geography of uses are more than local systems because their physical dimensions is very much related to their virtual one. Today, virtual space is a very important part of our daily lives and influence our way of behaving and moving in the physical space. This is evident if we think about our daily experience and how much it is influenced by the contents that we find online or that we create, simply writing, taking pictures, sharing videos, and so on. The result of this activity is that all the informations that once were hidden inside the buildings are now taken outside. The building of virtual space can be seen as a setup activity made with ephemeral virtual material like lights, colored messages, information, music, everything that the user can imagine and can add to the physical space, sharing his experience. As the architect and video artist Keiichi Matsuda explained in his video Hyperreality in 2016. In his video, the city of tomorrow is a personal space, an interactive space where users can change the space that they live according to their own personality. This new interactive urban space creates an augmented form of locality that is not based on the physical proximity, but more on the possibility to be connected. This has many impacts in the way space can be designed. Like, for example, in what happened in Milan, in my neighborhood, via Paolo Sarpi, as I will show you now. Paolo Sarpi, as you probably know, is the main street of the Milanese Chinatown, and it is a pietonal street crossed by many heterogeneous and multicultural practices. Recently, the real estate values of the neighborhood increased a lot, and so many shops and activities had to close. But at the same time, the street has been rapidly filled by an increasing number of small street food activities, whose activity is based on an extended community composed of the physical one walking in the street and the virtual one reachable through the new food delivery apps. In fact, if you look at Google Maps while you are moving in Paolo Sarpi, you may find a very crowded virtual space. Internet website, Instagram profiles, geotag, smart payment methods, and so on. This strategy produces a space that are much smaller than the ones that were there before and designed in a different way. The kitchen is seen directly from the street, like in a kind of theatrical scene. The window is photogenic and decorated. The space for cash register is quite disappeared because many people pay through WeChat or Satispay. The place for the customer is located directly on the street, and then as a natural extension of the place of the shop. So it's interesting to notice that these spaces invested more in the virtual space than in the physical one, using the space of the street as a natural extension of their own space, and giving the street an even more dynamic atmosphere based on the hybridation of physical and virtual, interior and exterior, and so making Paolo Sarpi a space that is a kind of userscape, a more complex structure, not just related to its architectonical quality. These observations may suggest to the architect to consider the virtual space as a part of the project, so as a complementary part of the physical one, using it to create strategies to engage the users. The last category is called transcalability, and it is related to the fact that in this expanded spatial condition, where the actions of each one has multiple and unpredictable connections, we can describe a context without hierarchies that can't be understood following a linear approach. Transcalability looks like a more suitable category to look at the contemporary space that is fragmented and interconnected. As the sociologist Derek de Kerkhove affirmed, we are passing from a system based on the linearity of the text to a system based on the hypertext. That means the presence of everything everywhere. In the contemporary city, each design practice at any scale can have a direct connections with wider systems. These appear even more clear if we think about the entire economy based on individual initiatives on spaces like Airbnb, or if we think about the commercial strategy of a company like IKEA, whose proposal is not just to sell furniture, but to provide people with equipment to expand their creativity, tools for direct actions and unpredictable behaviors in space. This has been shown also in one of my case studies, that is this research by Matilde Cassani called Separated Interiors in Profane Buildings, where she analyzed how some religious minorities create their space for celebrating in places like houses, garages, and warehouses, just using objects, decorations, YouTube prayers, and systems like the IKEA ones. These examples show that today, the continuous process of transformation of the urban space is mediated by many elements that are not just architectonical, but that are all related to the ability of users to inhabit space in many different ways, using many equipments to adapt them to different needs and different times, expanding that creative attitude that they first experiment at home to the space of the whole city. I'm finished. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chiara. Thank you very much. And now we are going to the last presentation.
Of Beatrice Balducci.
Yes.
Good morning. I share the screen.
Okay.
Yes. And of course, if you want to have some question, we can make at the end for everybody.
Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So good morning, everybody. I am Beatrice Balducci. I am a PhD candidate at Politecnico di Milano, and as Professor Rocca said before, I started my PhD this year, so more or less 7 months ago. And I'm doing my research with the supervisor, Alessandro Rocca. So today, I'm going to give you a short lecture about my research topic, and I'm working on the architectural potentiality of the security measures against natural risk. So my research started from 2 main questions. So how can the project of security measure can inform the architectural design? And how can architecture can inform the project of security measure through its disciplinary tools? And also, which are those exportable principles that are at the base of the design of security measure, which can lead to address simultaneously the threat and the human requirements to protect, to provide, and to include. So at the core of my study and also of my presentation, there is the fact that I'm looking at the security measure through the lens of architecture as a regenerative tool. And I'm studying those projects of safe spaces which embody the uncertainty and the risk as a design principle in order to regenerate and to enhance a context beyond the functional need for security. So today, shocks such as epidemics, such as the COVID-19, as you know, floodings, earthquake, especially in the center of Italy, are threatening the human environment. And with the climate change on the rise, there is an increase of vulnerable territories to which will correspond a need for security. So as you can see from this graphic, in the last 20 years, we observe an increase both in the frequency, but also in the intensity of the disaster, as well as a global interest in the concept of preparedness, so to be prepared a possible risk, and also the introduction of the Anthropocene context, which introduce a different relation between the human and the environment, which are all the concepts that we as architects can must keep into consideration when we design. So what often happens when we speak about security measures is that due to the emergency situation, due to the design process, due to the urgency, and of course the economical resources, they are also in the practical, but also in the symbolical way, thought as a separation, as something that walls in or walls out the threat. So I give you some practical example. If you think about L'Aquila, after the earthquake of 2009, what happens in the red zone was that in the city center, it was that the city center was declared red zone, so it was inaccessible. So the most part of the building was secured by provisional structures, but those provisional structures become more and more permanent. So they last 10 years, and the people was displaced and they was moved to live in the Progetto Case, that is outside the city. But another very impressive example, I think it's the protective infrastructure that was built in Japan after the earthquake and tsunami in 2011. In 2011, there were a huge earthquake in the northern part of Japan that is made by small villages at the very Japanese scale, so very, very small. And the government decided to build this huge concrete infrastructure that, of course, protect the villages from a possible tsunami and, of course, an earthquake. But the fact is that generates huge vulnerability because it cut out and separates the village from the sea, that it's not only in terms of identitarian element because they live on the coastline, but also it generates vulnerability in economical terms because they live in on a fishing economy. So I'm asking myself if the security measure can be considered, of course, as designers, as architects, as design opportunity to improve the context, not only in the functional terms of security. So I structure my presentation into 3 main concepts, that post-emergency risk and preparedness, that are all related because they are in the same family of the emergency. But if we look them from a design perspective, they implies very different actions and very different process. And I will tackle 2 main topics that are the temporality and the architecture as a regenerative tool. So the temporality, I will explain you some case studies which embody the concept of timing, considering 2 different timings, the state of emergency, but also the state of quiet. And I will tackle the architecture as a regenerative tool because I will show you some example in which the risk and the uncertainties are embodied by the architecture as a design opportunity of enhancement. So I will show you this. The first project is STEM Procedure by Nina Bassoli and Franco Tagliabue. This is not built. This is a theoretical project that they developed in 2016, considering the Emilia-Romagna region that was struck by an earthquake in 2012. What they did is that they consider the different phases of the emergency. So starting from the first phase and to go to the reconstruction phase, identify the need to act with a strategy that conceived a good quality architecture that is able to adapt in the changing of the different phases. So you know that the first phase of emergency is characterized by the basic survival element that the population needs. So the temporary shelter, the hospitals, the food, etc. And then there is the refunctioning and reconstruction phase. But between these two phases, there is a time that is a sort of, yes, there is undefined timings, which is considered by the author as the last step of the first phase and the first step of the reconstruction and refunctioning phases. So they identify the need to intervene in this second phase with good quality architecture in order to start a good quality reconstruction. So what I did at the beginning was to do a survey of the existing red zone of, in this case, is Mirandola and Emilia-Romagna. So what I did is that they observe how the red zone was made by those provisional structure that they are actually architectures, because they consider them a kind of ghost town by provisional structure and debris. That is a kind of overwritten town on the existing one. And so what I think it's interesting is that they dialogue with that kind of town at the beginning, with that kind of context. And so they develop a strategy in which they identify different elements, such as the observatory, such as the facility hub, the archive, collecting, building, the housing, and the debris, because they consider the actual context of the emergency, because you know that after an earthquake, a huge problem are the debris of the disaster. And so they developed this strategy in which all those elements are thought to be adaptive and to be, in order to be changed in different phases. So I give you the example of the observatory. So they do this first tower made by prefab modules, and so very, very light structure, which during the first phase of the emergency, it can be used as by the public administration as info point also for the citizen, but then it becomes a landmark when the reconstruction is started. And so a landmark in order to give a new identity of the city for the new city, as well as for the housing. They started with the idea of offering, of course, the prefab temporary housing that can adapt and can be an incremental housing on the inspiration of Aravena, also in the other phase of the emergency. And so they introduced the idea to live in the red zone, which is a very, very huge problem when we speak about the emergency and the identity of the people. So the second part, I will speak about risk. So risk is a slightly different in terms of design from the post-emergency phase, because when you dialogue with the risk as a designer, you consider a possible emergency, but you don't know when the emergency will come and if will come. You know, for instance, which kind of risk you have. If we speak about the center of Italy, we know that we have an highly seismic risk, but we don't know when a future earthquake will come. And this is a nice project by the MIT Urbanist Club, that is a research group at the MIT in the United States. They work in Nepal in a context which was highly vulnerable to seismic risk. It was struck by an earthquake a few years before, but there was a problem in economical resources because, in economical terms, because it was impossible to secure all the city. So they identify one element in the city strategically located because it was in the center of the city and was strategic not only for the emergency, but also in the state of quiet because it was at the very city center and in a very identitarian place. And they designed anti-seismic structure, very, very safe, but they combine the fact that they had the opportunity to design something new and something safe, to the idea to introduce a water depurator that was lacking, that was a problem in this context. So they match a safe space and the introduction of an emergency structure with the idea to solve some existing problem and to introduce an identitarian element that could work both in the state of quiet and in the state of emergency. And this, of course, influenced all the design of the building. So they always thought with this double temporality, every part and every space of the building. And so, as you can see from this section, all the ground floor and all the basement is for the water, and so to offer drinkable water. And then it conceived as a civic center, as identitarian center, that is the safest place in case of emergency, but is the safest place also for the drinkable water, and as an identitarian element in the daily life. And this is another example that is by Kashef Chaudhuri in Bangladesh. So it is another context that is highly vulnerable, and the main risk is the cyclone. So the architects developed this project, and I think it's quite interesting because in a certain way embody the catastrophe in a very, very physical way. So it becomes an architectural element that is this ramp. So in November 2007, in this area of Bangladesh, a huge cyclone struck all the villages and all the built environment. And so for the same reason of the project before, they invest the money and they invest all the architectural practices in one building that it becomes the safest buildings for all the community. And so they developed this huge ramp that wrap actually the building that is thought as a daycare, hospital, and also a school in state of quiet. But it's interesting because they developed this ramp that cover the windows that are the main problem during the cyclones, the opening of the buildings, because as you know, during the cyclone, the wind is very speed, like 200 kilometers per hour, and it's very dangerous because it can be very dangerous in case of the trees that are cut out or the roof of the other buildings. And so they protect the building with this ramp, but they consider also the state of quiet, because this ramp protect the building also from the lighting and the heating in the state of quiet. And it becomes a very interesting architectural elements that bring the inhabitants and bring the people on the top of the building. So as I said before, also this project dialogue with these two different timings and solve an existing problem of public services. So it's an actual public services infrastructure, but dialogues with the emergency also with an architectural character. And the last part of my presentation is dealing with the idea of preparedness, that I think it's a very interesting concept for us as architects, because it leads to the idea of to think different scenarios, and so to design spaces thinking at different scenarios possible. And it was a concept highly debated by during the COVID-19. And the last example is a park, park in Tokyo. Actually, it's not a very it's not a very good architectural example, but it's interesting because it was a park that was designed here. This is the center of Tokyo that is huge, but these are the two main infrastructure and motorway that connect all the part of Tokyo. And it was built here in this part that was destroyed by the previous earthquake. And so they decide to design a park that is conceived with a different temporality, but all the elements of the park are conceived to be ready in case of emergency. So for instance, I don't know, all the benches, if you remove the seating of the benches, you have the fire for cooking. Or for instance, all the lighting system is thought in case of shortage. That is one important thing in case of emergency. So you can connect you can have the lights and the electricity also in case of shortage, because it works with a solar panel. And so what I think it's interesting in this case is that they use this abandoned area and destroyed area by the previous seismic disaster in order to build a very safe space that is huge infrastructure space in terms of green and park, in order to be prepared. And in order to be prepared are different kinds of emergency, because the Japan is highly vulnerable to several disasters, mainly up to the earthquake, but it's highly vulnerable. And so they identify this area in which there is the hospital here that was already there. And so they have already a facility that is very important. But then they build also another building that is a kind of bunker. So it's a very heavy intervention because it's underground. But in the state of quiet is a center, the prevention center in which they do the training to be prepared at the emergency. And in the state of emergency, it becomes the safest space ever, because it can host all the people. So even if you're working on mobile architecture, and I presented very fixed project, I think that these case studies can be useful because they introduce some principle to look at the emergency with another perspective, not only with the idea of creating shelter, but with the idea to be in a certain way, the idea to be anti-fragile. So to consider the emergency as a design opportunity to improve a context, and also to improve the research in architecture. And so thank you.
Okay, so thank you to Beatrice, Giulia, and Chiara for the presentation. They are in this moment in different part of the studies, so you see different level in which they are making their research. Research is always very important, because is what we need to forward, and so part of this, of course, are very theoretical, but this is an aspect that is really needed, because part of the research need all this theoretical kind of approach and analysis. So I don't know if there are any kind of questions that students or the other participants want to do, or comments. All the time we have this situation, but it's okay. I think that it was. We have one message. One moment. Okay, I think that so if you don't have any kind of question, we can finish this morning. That was all dedicated to the PhD of Polytechnic of Milan, and to the presentation of Camillo Magni. For the students, this is the last day of hard work, because tomorrow they have the final presentation. That is not final, because they will have time 1 month, more than 1 month, to conclude the competition, because the workshop ends with the competition. But this is the last time that we make collective revision and so on. So they have a hard day and a hard night. So I think that they want to hurry to do this. So thank you very much for presentation to the guests and for everybody who participate. And I just remember that tomorrow at 3 o'clock in Italian, we will have the closing lecture by Orazio Carpenzano, that is the director of the Department of Roma Architecture in Roma La Sapienza. And so we are all invited to participate. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sonia, for the presentation, and to all the other ones.